morning. I'm going to have to shift these little things here around just a little bit. Somebody left some sunglasses? Huh? Paul? Okay. Well, welcome.
This is the one for the club, so they don't just speak up for them to hear you.
Okay. So that you can hear me. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand. I want to thank Bill Armstead, who has been a great campaign chairman. This has been a very rough race from the very beginning. We fought everybody from Washington to across the country. We were having to fight for this position, and Bill is an excellent fighter, excellent campaign chairman. I also have Harold Sox here, who is the chief of staff of the Republican Party. I want to recognize him. And Paul Reynolds and Vicki Drummond from the National Committee. Raise your hand. Okay, there you go. Nice to have y'all. Starting to recognize people in such a crowd is very difficult because you always forget people. But I want to recognize one fellow here, and that's right here. Russell, stand up, please. Russell served with me in the 198th MP Company, 504th MP Battalion in Vietnam and Da Nang, and he has been a good friend. He happens to be in Birmingham. It's not often you see a fellow that you served with in Vietnam. I see other Vietnam veterans here, and welcome. And probably, let's see, have we got any World War II veterans? There's one, two. Y'all stand up. Stand up. Now, give these guys a hand because this. How about Korea? If we got anybody from Korean War. Now Vietnam. How about Afghanistan and Iraq? They got it right back here. I want to thank Paul DeMarco, who was a great representative and still serving, and for his chairmanship of this party, and Joe Fuller, who introduced some things earlier. And go back to my wife. She is pretty, and I appreciate that. And, you know, she sometimes, as we get older, ladies sometimes put these masks on, you know, at night. And you wonder how they stay so pretty, but they put the mask on, and it's a good thing, I guess. But the story goes that one little girl came through her mother's bedroom, and she was putting the mask on, and she said, "Grandma, what are you doing?" And she says, "I'm making myself beautiful, honey." And so the little girl went on, came back a little bit later, and the grandmother was washing the makeup off, the mask off, and she said, "What are you doing now, Grandma?" She says, "Well, I'm taking it off." The little girl said, "Did you give up?" Yeah, I think that's an interesting little story to recognize where we are in this country. Are we going to give up on our country? Now, these men that you've recognized here, they didn't give up. They knew a country a while back that was far different than the country we live in today. The thing I see in this country today is maybe we don't appreciate our country enough. Maybe we don't appreciate our Constitution and form of government enough. Maybe it's because we don't understand it. On this Veterans Day, it's a special day. It's a special day that we recognize those who served in all the armed forces, and Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. But we also ought to recognize the people that serve here, the police, the firemen, and people that serve our communities. I'm proud of my service in Vietnam. I'm proud to have served with people like Russell Paget, did such a great job there, and they did their job. Nobody wanted to go. People don't want to go to Vietnam. They don't want to go to Korea, Vietnam War. It's just not a comfortable position to be in. You leave your home, your family, and never know whether you return. Some of my classmates from West Point didn't return. I'm proud to have my father, who have served in World War II. He's been gone for many years now, but he served in World War II, and now two of my sons are in the military. One is serving in the Army Reserve here in Birmingham. He goes to his meetings and travels and other things. And the other is serving at the United States Military Academy in his second year. So he's got a military career ahead of him. From Valley Forge to Yorktown, from Shiloh to Gettysburg, Pearl Harbor to Normandy, from the cold, barren hills of North Korea to the jungles of Vietnam and the sands of Iraq and Afghanistan, we've got veterans all over this country that have served their country. And therefore, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, when we sing the national anthem, we ought to give respect to that country that allows us to have exactly what we see in here today. News media able to inquire, to seek out the truth, people that protest things they don't like and they don't agree with, maybe they don't understand, but they're still free to protest. And that's what this country is all about. It's about freedom, it's about liberty, and it's about the chance to express yourself. Now, if you can't appreciate that, you can't appreciate your country, and vice versa. If you can't appreciate your country, you can't appreciate that, because I've been in countries where these freedoms were not there. That pride in our country that we say in the national anthem, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming." That pride today is being eroded by a lack of understanding of where our rights and freedoms come from. They come from God and a country that is there to secure those rights for us. When we kneel, when the national anthem is sung, when we don't stand in respect for those veterans who fought in war and in remembrance of those who have died in war, then we're doing something we shouldn't do. We are free to protest, but it is because our country gives us that right to protest. I regard highly the right to protest, and our freedoms are in jeopardy. But our flag represents that country that God gave us and those rights that we have. I have brought a little pamphlet. I think we have a box somewhere here of pamphlets. Where's my, it's back there. And there'll be some available if some of you want to pick up this pamphlet. It's called One Nation Under God. I designed this pamphlet. I also want to recognize Glenn Murdoch. I skipped Glenn Murdoch. Where is Glenn? There he is, brown coat. Good to see you. Glenn Murdoch served with me on the Alabama Supreme Court. He's a great justice, very intelligent, fairly good looking. But he's come today. He lives in this area, and he has done a lot to protect our rights and freedoms through the law. But this little pamphlet will give you an introduction of where the Declaration came from, where our rights come from, and the role of government. It'll tell you about the Constitution and the form of government that we should understand better. You know, I'm running for the United States Senate, and this is one thing that's very special to me. It's the United States Constitution. I took an oath to the Constitution back in 1965 on the banks of the Hudson River. It was a very hard time for me going into the United States Military Academy as a plebe. It wasn't an easy time, and I, quite frankly, didn't appreciate the Constitution like I do today. I've taken that oath, I've given that oath to governors, to senators, to justices, and I'm going to tell you, we need to understand that for which we fight. When I was in Vietnam, I had a friend on the gymnastics team that was, his name was John Cheyne. I remember him very well because he always had a smile on his face. His face just smiled. He was a devout Christian. He got that Christianity at the United States Military Academy, and he went over to Vietnam. And toward the end of the war, he was on a mission. He had already found out that that mission was going to be very dangerous. And he didn't really want to go. He wrote back to his brother that he was going on a mission, and they were talking about ending the war. And he asked advice of his brother, and his brother said, well, you've been sworn to do your duty. That's what you do. Well, John went on that mission, and they got some fire from the enemy, and they thought they would return the fire, which they did. And they thought it was just a small group of Viet Cong. It turned out to be a battalion. And they fired back. He got hit in the head, and in a book that was written about him, his sergeant asked him, sir, can we help you? And he said, no, take care of the men. That kind of dedication, that kind of loyalty and respect, we don't have a lot in some places of America. We have it over in Afghanistan and Iraq. You'll see many examples of valor and courage that come out of places where men and women are put in positions where they have to fight for these freedoms. I have a story that was known a few years ago about the Pledge of Allegiance. It's from a speech made by Captain John McCain, United States Navy, who presently serves in the United States Senate. And you know, John McCain has got a problem, medical problem right now. He needs our prayers. But he told this story about something that he actually saw. He said, I spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. The NVA kept us in a military confinement. One of the men who moved into my room was a young man named Mike Christian. Mike was from Selma, Alabama. He died a few years ago. He didn't wear a pair of shoes until he was 13 years old. And at age 15 or 17, he enlisted in the United States Navy. He later earned a commission in officer training school and became a naval flight officer, and after which he was shot down in 1967. As part of the change in treatment, the Vietnamese allowed some prisoners to receive packages from home, and one of those packages were handkerchiefs, scarves, and other items of clothing. Mike got himself a bamboo needle, and over a period of a couple of months, he sewed an American flag. Every afternoon before we had a bowl of soup, we would hang Mike's shirt on the wall of the cell and say the Pledge of Allegiance. One day, Vietnamese searched our cell. They found Mike's shirt with the flag, and they removed it. That evening, they came in, and in front of everybody, they beat Mike Christian severely for the next couple of hours. Then they opened the door of the cell and threw him back in after they had beaten him and taken him out. We cleaned him up as well as we could. The cell in which we lived was basically a cement slab with 4 naked light bulbs hung in each corner of the room. As I said, we tried to clean Mike up. After the excitement died down, I looked in the corner of the room, and sitting there beneath that dim light with a piece of red cloth, another shirt, and his bamboo needle was my friend, Mike Christian. He was sitting there with his eyes almost shut from the beating he had taken, making another American flag. So the next time you say the Pledge of Allegiance, don't ever forget the sacrifices and courages that thousands of Americans have made. And always remember your duty, honor the country. Those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you can be, what you will be, what you're meant to be. They are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, and to create hope when hope has become forlorn. Those words out of General Douglas MacArthur's mouth at the United States Military Academy in the 1960s. His farewell address to the United States Military Academy still ring in my ear because they're what every soldier, every sailor, every Marine sees and feels when they go into combat. The national anthem has always been very special to me. It's a time that we recognize the things that others have fought for and died for. Often we all know how the national anthem goes. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? I repeated that earlier. But what we fail to remember is the second verse. That on Veterans Day, when they sing the national anthem, I wish they would sing the second verse. Oh, thus be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may this heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just. And this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. You know, we fought many wars. I have here a list of the wars we've fought. In the first 5 wars, we lost thousands of people, other than the Civil War. During those first 5 wars, on one battlefield in the Civil War, on 3 days, we lost about 5 times the number of people we lost at Pearl Harbor and in the falling of the Twin Towers. In Twin Towers, it was approximately 3,000 people. At Pearl Harbor, it was approximately 2,800. But in Gettysburg, in 1863, we lost approximately 50,000 Americans in 3 days. President Abraham Lincoln went back to Gettysburg months later. They said that's where he became a Christian, as he looked at those graves and sacrifices of those men, North and South, who died there fighting for what they believed in. And he made this statement. Actually gave about a 6 or 7, 8-minute talk. Preceding him was a man that spoke for 2 hours, an orator. We don't even remember who he was. But President Lincoln, in about 7 or 8 minutes, said this: 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can so long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place to those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who suffered here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. And then he said this, and I think it's relative today: the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it could never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take an increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. You know, that should be our call today. Let us today gather together on this Veterans Day and remember the sacrifices of those men who have fought and died for this country and those who have served in our military in all branches. Now I want to address something that some people have come to hear about. Shortly after becoming the Republican nominee for the United States Senate, the Washington Post began an attack on the Foundation for Moral Law, on my wife, and on me. For weeks, we read about my salary, which they distorted, about taxes, which they said should have been paid on money we never got, but we endured that. Later, they came about and openly endorsed my opponent in this race. Just 2 days ago, the Washington Post published yet another attack on my character and reputation in a desperate attempt to stop my political campaign for the United States Senate. These attacks involve a minor, and they are completely false and untrue about something that happened nearly 40 years ago. But more than being completely false and untrue, they're very hurtful to me personally. I've been married to my wife, Kayla, for nearly 33 years. We have 4 children. I have 1 daughter, and I have 5 granddaughters. I have the highest regard for the protection of young children. When I returned to Gadsden 40 years ago, after military service, I went to work in the office of the district attorney. As a student of the law, I have served in public office on and off for the last 40 years. To be attacked for allegations of sexual misconduct contradicts my entire career in law. I want to make it clear to the media present and to the people present, I have not provided alcoholic beverages, beer, or anything else to a minor. I have not been guilty of sexual misconduct with anyone. These allegations came only 4.5 weeks before the general election on December 12th. Why now? For 40 years, I have been closely scrutinized in the press and the public media. I've had investigations by the Attorney General. I've had investigations by the Judicial Inquiry Commission on more than one occasion. I've had investigations by the Court of the Judiciary. I've been in 5 statewide campaigns in which they do opposition research. They do investigations, as you can see in every one I've ever run. 3 county elections and 2 major controversies over religious liberty and the 10 Commandments and same-sex marriage. I've been investigated more than any other person in this country. To think that grown women would wait 40 years to come right before an election to bring charges is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah. Why now? The Democrats and the Republican establishment know the importance of this election. In fact, most people in America know the importance of this election. They see it as a prelude to the elections coming in 2018. It may very well determine the future of our country. My opponent is 11 points behind. That came out just days before this article came out. They're desperate. This article is a prime example of fake news, an attempt to divert attention from the true issues which affect our country, like health care, military readiness, tax reform, immigration, and national debt. We do not intend to let the Democrats or the established Republicans or anybody else behind this story stop this campaign. There are investigations going on. In the next few days, there will be revelations about the motivations and the content of this article. They will be brought to the public. We fully expect the people of Alabama to see through this charade and to vote in the primary coming up. As Mr. Armistead said, we do not engage in negative campaigning. We haven't, and I've been blistered in articles from last 2 to 3 months on television, and it will continue. I do not expect the Washington Post to stop. I think they have a political agenda, and I think they're running that agenda, and everybody in this room, every person watching on these cameras should ask themselves, isn't it strange that after 40 years of constant investigation, people have waited to 4 weeks prior to the general election to bring their complaints. That's not a coincidence. It's an intentional act to stop a campaign. May God bless you, bless the state of Alabama, and the United States of America. Thank you.